Hi, welcome to EDSE 550. I am Professor Bobo, and it is week 2, and this is the instructor's video. I'll be sharing my screen with you, going over your assignments as a reminder. Please remember that you can also review the welcome video that has all of the assignments in detail as I make changes or as we discuss the assignments that are due for the week. I may make an additional video to assist you with finding information. So for this week, I'm going to be sharing my screen, our Blackboard, just getting us prepared. We have various videos that you will be reviewing, and this will help you to prepare for your assignment that is due this week. So we'll be reading chapters 3 and 4, and I'll lecture a little bit about that on this video. And then you have 2 discussion board reflection topics. It's important with these discussion boards that you go into detail and make sure that you don't just say, I agree or disagree to your peers. It's important that you remember to give some insight or an opinion or add more knowledge or information as you are responding. Don't forget to use your citation or references when you are answering the question. So in the first discussion board topic, you're going to find 2 federal, state, county, or district policies in which you feel support student success, either emotionally, behaviorally, academically. In contrast, you're going to describe 2 policies which you feel have impeded student success. And then you're going to make sure that you do that by Thursday. Your second discussion board is after you're reading the brief article, you click on the article regarding civic engagement. How do these practices, conditions, and student behaviors apply or vary in school counseling context? You can watch the Ask a Webinar before answering the question as well. And then you have your assignment, which is due on Sunday, the Achievement Gap assignment. So I went over the Achievement Gap assignment in detail in week 1 on the welcome videos, and we will have discussed it during week 1 as well. So if you have questions or concerns, please refer back to those videos for additional assistance. What I'd like to do now is go ahead and talk a little bit about chapters 3 and 4. And I have a PowerPoint for us to kind of go over the highlights of those chapters. All right. So in chapter 3, we talked a lot about implicit bias. And what is that? So implicit bias is a form of bias that occurs automatically and unintentionally that nevertheless affects judgments, decisions, and behaviors. Research has shown that implicit bias can pose barriers to all different types of workforce. So this is something that it's important for us to be aware of. The first step is to acknowledge that every person has implicit bias. So there is not one individual that does not have implicit bias, and biases that relate to race, okay? It isn't a judgment against those with biases. It's a natural part of the way our brains work, and we are products of the society that we live in, and we're all affected by it. So one of the constant struggles of equity work is feeling that we're stuck, and we're not stuck. The system is set up to disadvantage people of color. And in fact, the education system was created only for white people and hasn't, drastically changed over the years. So talking about bias is very uncomfortable. Adults typically shy away from talking about bias because they're worried that they may look insensitive or be accused of being racist. The book went over some specific statistics, which I thought were very important. Some of the statistics included that students of color achieve at significantly lower rates than white students. And when asked why that is, you might hear about parent involvement, poverty, attitude, and education, or other factors that presume superiority of the mainstream white culture to justify the lower achievement rates. But the statistics show something else. In 2013, the National Assessment of Education Progress Project found that the average reading score for eighth grade Black students from a middle class household is the same as the white students from households eligible for free and reduced lunch. 78% of African American people in the United States do not live in poverty, and that's according to the Kaiser Family Foundation in 2017. And even though the vast majority of African American friends, students, and colleagues are not living in poverty, there is often a false association between poverty and being Black. So when we reflect on our beliefs about low achievement, we may realize that there are assumptions made that are not factual or supported by the data. So we would prefer perhaps to blame socioeconomic status on achievement, but in reality, achievement is not accessible to Black students the way it is for white students, regardless of economics, involvement, or attitudes. So, research has shown that how we attack some of these implicit biases is through effective bias reduction strategies. And I'm going to name a couple of them, a couple of strategies that help to make things a little bit easier. So, we have counter stereotypic. This is when you are attempting to it's an idea that an object that goes against a standard mental picture that is held by common members of a group and that represent or oversimplify opinion, prejudice, attitudes, or uncritical judgments. So an example of that would be, identify scientists of diverse backgrounds in your field. All right. Another strategy is perceptive taking, and that is to imagine what it's like to be a person who experiences people questioning your ability or skills because of your social identity. So this is this is part of our self-reflection. And if we can sit and stop and think about some of these strategies and use them, then we can empathize with what people of color kind of experience. Interrupt automatic bias thought. That's another strategy. And this you can do this by identifying when you may be most influenced by an implicit bias. An example is, evaluation performance, and create an action plan. And an example of an action plan would be review evaluation criteria before assessing each person's performance in the form of an if-then statement to increase mindfulness of or mitigate the influences of implicit bias. So that's another strategy. Just try to think of those if-then situations and see if you are actually thinking of implicit biases and how you can interrupt those thoughts. And then education, obviously, by educating ourselves and looking at the statistics that our chapter went over, that we want to blame things on that, but perhaps that's not necessarily the truth. Okay. So, you want to join or be a part of implicit bias workshops in your community to continue to raise awareness. All right. So some points to consider is that bias can exist whether you consciously agree with it or not. That we use our explicit cognitive thought processes to explain away our implicit automatic responses. And that ethical standards and positions from the American School Counselor Association underscore the importance of combating biases and increasing our cultural competencies for all school counselors. So it's important that as we get that student in our room and they're explaining things to us, that we remember that it's that everything is not equitable, and how do we get it to be equitable, and that we hear that student and not make up excuses for why, like poverty, like low in uh, race or gender, for the reason why the student may not be achieving. Okay. In chapter 4, we talked about the benefits of self reflection, and I kind of went over that with those strategies. As we self reflect, if we look at it from the individual level of ecology, it allows us to focus on what we are, where we come from, and how we develop. If we look at it from the family's familiar standpoint, we have to take time to understand and cope with the people in our lives whom we did not choose. We didn't choose our family. And some of us have families that are nurturing, encouraging, supportive, and believe in us. And some of us have families who hurt us more than we care to admit. So underlying all of this is a system of values that we inherit simply by being born in to the people who raised us, or born and then adopted by people who raised us. And so Anthony Bowen is a family systems theorist who believes that our upbringing is a complex web of interactions. All right. Then we want to take a look at the student educator counselor dynamic, and that just about every counselor and educator is asked to create a philosophy and a practice at some point in their career. And we are tasked to reveal how we believe that might impact our students. And most of us want to be helpers, listeners, and encouragers, but rarely do counselors consider themselves to be agents of change in a racist society. But that is our responsibility, and that's something that has been listed in our ethical standards as counselors. And then we have the counselor/teacher administrator, and the language shifts every year. Recently, we've reinforced the term people of color. And by the time this book is, we're finished with this book, there will be new terms, and we have to accept that change is inevitable. And what once was acceptable will someday be outdated and possibly even offensive. So it's important for us to continue to do professional development, and another way to address how we choose to collaborate with our colleagues. And professional development allows us to increase our social justice tools and gives us a safe place in which we can practice the language of courage, and have courageous conversations. There's often quite a bit of practice involved in this work because, again, we're not socialized to discuss race. Educators, especially counselors, are tasked with diving into the trenches of race-related conversations and actions. And so this is where we have to come out of our shells. I mean, so many times, and me, I was an African American growing up in an all-white educational system. I went to private white schools that were predominantly white, and so when race was African Americans were brought up, I mean, it kind of put me in a place where I didn't want to discuss it. I didn't want to talk about my differences because I was probably the only one in the room, and that's a difficult conversation. There was a term in there, intersectional identity, as it relates to race. It is the overlapping and entwining nature of people. And the intersection of race and sibling order or gender and influences are examples of how complex the human condition is. And we have described identity above, and you have connected your experiences with how you express yourself as a person. So this was a term that I felt was pretty important. Some things that don't work in regards to implicit biases. While it's important for us to raise awareness and reduce implicit biases, it's important to promote a diverse workforce. And implicit bias is only one among the factors that addressing it will help change the workforce. We need to make sure that there's an integrated approach to increasing participation and engagement of underrepresented groups. And it's essential to achieve true diversity and inclusion within an organization. So we do know that Some diversity training programs have not been as effective. So mandatory diversity training has been not as effective. Job testing and grievance systems have not been tested and have not had great results in reducing implicit biases. The diversity programs that do get better results for lowering implicit biases are voluntary training programs, self-management teams, cross-training, college recruitments for women and for minorities, mentoring, diversity task force, and diversity managers, managers of diverse backgrounds. So these are the things that do work. So here's some questions that you can ask yourself. What are two of your identifiers that intersect congruently? And how do two identifiers have similar experiences? An example of this is I'm a Black woman, and I might identify as being Black and being a woman as two characteristics that share very similar experiences of scrutiny or unreasonable expectations. So if you're a person who identifies as a LGBTQ and comes from a poor working class family, you may also view these characteristics as having similar experiences of judgment and even shame, or conversely, self-drive and pride. So another question to ask ourselves is, what are two of your identifiers that intersect incongruently? And that might be being born into a wealthy family and Spanish speaking, or being young in age and burnt out from stressful work. So we have to continue to unravel the complexities of these intersectional identities in our life. And by doing this, we can identify even deeper, more complex ways of your belief system and how they've been shaped. And sometimes when we learn this and we do this self-reflection, then we're able to kind of challenge some of these biases. Did we just pick up these biases from our family and from the people that we're around? And do we really believe in them? So that's something that we really need to do. So self-reflection involves a multi-level insight. It is designed to increase awareness and understanding. And each level of insight offers a layer of information that can help inform school counseling practices. And of all the layers offered, counselors an opportunity to detail, examine, and question their life experiences in ways that shape their understanding for social justice perspective. So this is exactly what we want to do. This is a practice that we want to do, that the constant self-reflection to get rid of some of these implicit biases. And once again, I think the key to this chapter is really just understanding that we all have implicit biases. It's natural. It's part of it's what happens to us as being part of this society. And things are not equitable for everybody in this society. So when we see those and when we have those implicit biases, self-reflect, move forward. How do we change the tone? How do we have stronger conversations to make our workplace more friendly, or in our situation, yeah, not just the workplace, because if the workplace is toxic, then we can't be as great with our students. And we need to make sure that our students are not in a toxic environment. And then also, we just want to make sure that we're aware that, our students are coming from these backgrounds, and that they also are unable to have equity. So when we start to think about, their grades or getting into college, and we're talking to them, that the path for them getting there was not equitable necessarily, depending on their education. It's not because they're lazy. It's not because they come from low socioeconomics. It's not because of their gender. It's not because of their background, their race. We have to take a look at some of these things and reflect and see how we can be agents of change to help them be successful in this society. All right, that covers chapters 3 and 4 for week 2. If you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to me via text or email.